Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Now, whilst the majority of companies currently have their teams working remotely, the challenges associated with managing those teams have not left the workplace. One lady with a lot of experience in this particular area is Vanessa Tierney from Gorey-based Abodoo. Vanessa, when you last joined me on Business Matters 3 years ago, Abodoo was very much in its infancy. But how has the business developed and evolved since then?
Thank you so much, Karl. Great to be back. Well, if I remember right, we were just launching, and we had decided to launch out of the Hatch Lab in Gorey, and it went very well. So we launched Abodoo as a matching platform, so connecting companies with people that wanted to work remotely, either some or all of the time. And in our first year or two of going live, we had thousands of people who registered their skills, hundreds of companies on board, and we also did a collaboration with Vodafone Ireland about educating companies on the advantages and potential of, I think the term we like to use was smart working, so not just honing in on remote, but every type of working model. And, since then, from a matching perspective, we've seen people register across 62 countries. We're still very much an Irish organisation, but we have a global reach.
And of course, one of the latest breakthroughs that the company has announced is that now the service is free to everybody, companies and job seekers alike.
Yeah, this was something that was in our long-term vision. But the result of COVID fast-tracked everything. Really, the fact that we were all given 24 hours notice, companies were sort of forced into trialling remote work. And the proof has been in the pudding. And now that we've advanced to 10 years in terms of mindset shift, we now know that by opening up our platform to businesses to connect with people, it's the right thing to do. And what we're most interested in is actually encouraging people to create skills profiles on Abodoo. They are anonymous. They're in control of what company, organisation sees who they are. But what that means is that skills data is really powerful. And more than ever, local governments, inward investment agencies need a better accuracy and understanding of skills in a region, not just to reboot local economies, but also to attract inward investment agencies and inward investment companies.
And of course, as companies and employees were very much thrust into the unknown waters of remote working back in March, what were the initial challenges that they faced?
Oh, well, I think, starting really around that the technology and the connectivity was, usually before then, the trust was the biggest factor, but there was no time to think about the soft skills or the emotive side. This was purely a technical enablement, and many had to roll it out without policy in place, without protection in place. The BYOD, bring your own device, people had to use their own devices, but we all just did what we could. Now that we've realised that we're in this for the medium to long term, and whether, post-pandemic offices reopen, employers are now really reconsidering their options. And, the reality is a national survey has just been done, and 70% plus people are saying actually they want this level of flexibility to continue. So really, companies now are actually starting to think for the long term and invest for smart working models for the future, which is a promising thing for regional areas.
And Vanessa, in relation to the long-term plan from here in a post-COVID environment, are we going to see more of a hybrid model where people are going to work 2 or 3 days at home and 2 or 3 days in the office each week?
Look, absolutely, because if someone is commuting every day from Wexford to Dublin, for example, you're looking at an average daily commute of 2 hours, 10 hours over a week. That's more than a working day every single week that you're sitting in your car. And it doesn't matter what age you are or what circumstances you are, whether it's you want more time with the family, for your fitness, or just to have fun. The reality is people want the engagement. They do want to be in the office perhaps 1 or 2 days a week, but that can be achieved in a local digital hub or a co-working space. And a monthly meet-up in the Dublin office. There's going to be a huge shift. And then the second thing is people are really going to start rethinking where they live. 23% of people surveyed in this recent surveys done by NUI Galway are saying that they're reconsidering where they're going to live. 7% of people have already moved. And that's the reality. That was the experience for my husband and I. We realised after 2-3 years of remote working, actually, let's move to Wexford.
Vanessa, on that particular point, how can County Wexford maximise its potential as a result of this?
Well, I'm very excited about what we're going to be able to achieve for Wexford. Being our home turf, we did an exercise a year and a half ago of mapping the skilled talent, and that through, the great data that we're collecting on the Abodoo platform, we anonymise it and produce these maps showing where the skills are, the clusters, the earnings. And IDA actually successfully used that to land an international company into North Wexford from the software industry. Now we're looking to extend that, and so we're encouraging people that both live in Wexford now, who want to move back to Wexford, or who are thinking, actually, I've never lived in Wexford, this is where I want to go, to register their skills profile on Abodoo. There's no charge. That data is going to be fed into a talent heat map, but we have a new solution for government, and it's very dynamic. And what that will mean is we'll start competing as a county, not just for jobs nationally, but internationally. Because when you think about remote work, it's a game changer. Companies don't have to land here physically to hire here.
And Vanessa, as companies are now starting to regularise remote working within their own organisations, what obligations do they need to comply with?
Well, it's a tough ask to put more on employers in this current climate, but the risk assessment is, really one that you need to have a conversation with your insurance company with. And if you have people advising you, whether it's your local chamber, SFA or IBEC, around HR policies, it's very important to have policy in place, even if it's a few pages, outlining what's expected, whether the home is an extension of the office place, and therefore what insurance covers there are. And just the expectation in terms of how the person's even working. Like, a lot of people are talking about strain in their backs and necks because they're on laptops at kitchen tables. Mental health is a concern as well for people, to be able to ask for time out. But I think it's the adjustment in the management structure for people because, I've worked in an office in Dublin and I know what it's like. Presenteeism is key. If someone's late, it's like, well, why are you late? Are you taking this job seriously? Now, this new generation, this new world, results are all about the result is what you manage, no longer presenteeism. And you have to trust people. That's it. You just have to trust them.
And of course, with no co-workers in your living room, socialising with your peers can be a challenge and make remote working pretty lonely. What advice have you got, both for businesses and for remote working employees in that respect?
Okay, well, I have the answer, and it's groundbreaking. So I've been remote for 10 years, and I'm very excited to talk about our new partner called Yonderdesk. Yonderdesk are a virtual real estate. So imagine taking your shop or your office and bringing it online and replicating your lobby, having a virtual assistant. If you have 5 offices in your accountancy firm, if you have 2 storerooms in your shop, this all goes online, and now people can literally drop in and meet with you, and it's all branded. But from a connectivity perspective, it is just so disruptive because it doesn't matter if you're on Slack, Teams, whatever tool you use to connect with everybody, everyone gets their own office. Even you have your breakout room, your coffee station. And it sounds like it's a movie, another world, but it's not. It is actually brilliant for connecting with people. And since we've implemented Yonderdesk only in the last 2 months, the level of connection and less isolation among the team has been so much better. Nothing will replicate what we have when we're face-to-face, but this is definitely the hybrid because I have to say I'm so tired of video links and Zoom links and Team links. This for me has just been, it requires no links, and it doesn't matter what you're using, it can be embedded into this solution.
And the world of B2B selling has literally been turned upside down by COVID-19 and of course the travel restrictions that have been in place. So what would you say to those businesses that are now trying to adapt to selling through video calls?
Well, I think it's extremely challenging. Like so much is done face-to-face in, behaviours and body language. This can be done to an extent online, but I think actually emotional intelligence plays to an even stronger case. And I think people need to feel that it's not just a video meeting where you're presenting at them. More than ever, we have to not just question people's fears about the future and their business, but also take into consideration where they're dialing in from. They may have just had World War III with their kids, or it could be a really noisy environment. And I think considerate business sales professionals are doing really well in this current climate. But it goes back to this idea of like forcing meetings at forced times. It can be very challenging because you don't know what's happening for someone at home right now. Whereas having a situation where they can just pop in and meet you when suits, if you leave yourself open 10 till 12 every day, that brings it back to that sort of organic, let's meet in a coffee shop or a hotel lobby feeling. So that would be my advice. My recommendation is try and bring it to as casual level as possible because people are at home.
And Vanessa, I know that many businesses are struggling with measuring productivity with a remote workforce. What's the solution to that?
It's a very, very hard one to answer because it depends what industry you're in, who you're selling to, whether there's a budget availability. And I think for leaders, it's really to understand and do the right research and see what is possible right now. I know that we have taken the pressure off closing sales cycle time because we're now selling to government. Our platform is free, obviously, for businesses. Government lead time is usually 9 to 12 months. So for us, our focus is on making sure our pipelines are very, very big. But for other businesses, like if it's a lower transaction like Yonderdesk, we have a fast sales cycle. So it's just ensuring that we're talking to enough people every day that they're aware of that exists. But it's always about measuring results. And if people aren't getting results, it's very unlikely it's down to them not working hard. They just probably require more skills. Don't assume they can sell remotely because going from office to remote, it's tough. It took me a good 2-3 years to adjust to it, being honest. And then look at yourself as a leader because you too have to acquire new skills. But it can be done really effectively. And in time, post-pandemic, we'll look back at this and think, oh my God, this was the shift that business needed to become more sustainable.
And of course, the physical office was always a great passive learning environment, especially for new and junior staff. How can that be continued in a remote working environment?
It's funny because there's a lot of universities struggling with this point as well. How do you bring in first-year students and make them have that feeling of connecting with others and having a freshers week and making sure that they're learning and then being able to connect for opportunities post-university? I think they have a huge challenge. But I think onboarding needs to be really thought through. HR people that have worked in human resources at times have had it really hard in the last few years. They're not always included at the C-level conversation. And they're sort of seen as maybe admin, recruitment. Actually now HR has such an important role to play, and in a way if they can get the skills and people can invest training into them, they can become not the digital transformation specialists, because we've had those out for a number of years, but the work transformation specialists. They can be equipped to ensure that the onboarding, the e-learning, and even the first point of contact with people in terms of hiring, it's a really, really good experience.
And Vanessa, we have seen some very humorous interruptions in remote work settings over the past 7 months. But whether it's the family pet or whether it's the doorbell going, those distractions are a reality in a remote working environment. How do you deal with interruptions at home?
Yeah. Oh, you just have to do your best. I've been on meetings with CEOs or ministers, and the reality is that's just, we're all working from home. I think people assume that I'm an expert at remote working, but I'm not an expert at remote working with kids. That was never in the game plan. And but in a way, I would recommend don't get stressed. Your kids are impossible to keep quiet all of the time, or animals. And bring the comedy element in. And we're all human at the end of the day. We're all going through this. And I think when you can have a laugh about it, then it lowers the barrier with whoever you're talking to.
And Vanessa, you recently published a book which you co-wrote entitled Your Company with No Walls. Perhaps you can provide us with an overview of what business owners can take from this.
Yeah, well, it was really interesting because I met my co-author Tiana over a year ago at a virtual event. It was my first time attending, and we just bonded and we formed this mastermind group. So ladies all around the world, we get together once a month. And on one of these, she said to me she'd been trying to write a book on, she had managed gig workers for 10 years. And I'm the opposite. I've managed remote employees. So we both have very paralleled experiences, but we learned from each other. So we said, look, why don't we do this book together? And we actually started writing it last summer, so over a year ago. And we finished it in February, just as the pandemic hit. And we said, no, we need to rewrite so it's actually mentioning and relevant. But the book is just all about leaders being able to get the tools that we've acquired that took us maybe 2-3 years to understand, learn and put into our own businesses. And the idea is you read this and hopefully you won't make the mistakes we make, and you'll get the tips that we've learned, not just from ourselves, but, you know, I've been working with Fortune 1000 companies. Tiana's worked with different startups internationally, and it's a guide for leaders. And thankfully it's on Amazon in terms of a Kindle, but it's been doing really well.
And on the topic of gig workers, they are paid per delivery or per project. But do you see this model replacing the hourly rate that many people have been paid for spending time in an office?
Well, that type of model has been around for a while. If we look at the platforms such as Fiverr and Upwork, where, you know, you're bidding your time to complete a project, and, you know, but the challenge is if you're competing with someone in a region where, you know, standard of living or the cost of living is a tenth of what it is here, it's very hard to win that business. But by 2025, this is before COVID-19 hit, it was estimated like 50% of all workers will actually be gig working or contract or part-time. So, like, the reality is we'll probably have multiple careers in our lifespan. And the way to sort of stay ahead is actually start reskilling now and, you know, look at industry. Don't feel like you're locked in one industry for life. That's not the case anymore. And industries are so open. So if you're listening and you've come from hospitality, retail, tourism, you're thinking, oh, I've no hope, it's a declining industry. Now's the time to upskill. Get yourself on Abodoo. Upskill. We're starting to partner with different e-learning providers. And then be discovered for a new industry.
Now, finally, Vanessa, at the very least, companies and their employees are facing into remote working arrangements for at least another few months. But what advice do you have for companies that may be considering more longer-term remote working options?
I think involve the people, involve your teams and your staff. Don't make assumptions, and because everybody actually has a lot of value they can offer to your strategic planning. Speak with your customers as well. Understand how do they feel about the current interaction with the platforms you use, and does anything need to improve? Identify where learning and upskilling needs to happen, because it does. You know, I know sales have probably been hit for many organisations and productivity levels in some cases. And sometimes the natural inclination is to the saving, if you are saving on office costs, is to just bank that for the rainy day. But do try and reinvest where you can to make sure your HR people are equipped to support your teams. And if you're a small business and you can afford the time to have a one-to-one with each of your teams, do it. And say it's an off-the-record conversation, because they will, you know, your company right now more than ever is, and the greatest asset is really your people. And it's the same for the council and local governments. It's the people, it's the skills and their talent. That's what's going to reboot the economy.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Vanessa Tierney, the CEO of Abodoo, and I'd like to thank Vanessa for sharing her insights into how to effectively manage teams working remotely.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
South